Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, and thank you all for joining today's webinar, Conversations with Global Leaders, the Future of Globalization in an Increasingly Divided World. This is hosted by the NYU Abu Dhabi Alumni Association. Thanks to John Pine for organizing us, and it is one of our events celebrating the 10th anniversary of NYU Abu Dhabi. I am Mariët Westermann, the Vice-Chancellor of NYU Abu Dhabi, and I want to thank you for joining us today for this special program and making the time. This session is being recorded as it will be made available on our website later in the week. Yesterday, your institution, NYU Abu Dhabi, had an academic convocation that was an opportunity to welcome our new provost, Arlie Petters, who you will meet soon if you haven't already. Arlie gave a fantastic set of remarks on how he sees our academic institution and campus culture, and how he wants to advance both in an inclusive and warm way. I myself gave a state of the campus address on the enduring university. The enduring university, what has made NYUAD endure so well as it has this year? And what is of enduring value about universities? Perhaps the most important thing I said was this: great universities exist by their students. The original purpose of universities is to equip a next generation of human beings with knowledge and methods for seeking truth, so that they may live lives of civic contribution and personal fulfillment. The highest mission of all great universities exists in delivering such graduates to society and setting them on their path. Our Conversations with Global Leaders series for the 10th anniversary brings together panels of our incredible alumni who prove my point every day and who live and breathe the mission of NYU Abu Dhabi around the world. It is a true privilege to have 4 of them with us today to discuss an extremely relevant topic for NYUAD and a pressing one this year especially, the future of globalization in an increasingly divided world. Our wonderful panelists come to us from 4 different countries. Let's meet them now. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and unmute themselves and do so. Our first panelist to do so is Metha Al-Mamari. Metha?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for these conversations and series, especially in the time that we're in. So these should be exciting ones. First, my name is Metha Al-Mamari. I graduated in 2018. I'm currently in Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi is what I call home. I recently graduated from the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. I completed my master's in comparative international education, and I would also call Oxford home. And yeah.
Wonderful. And you had a whole bunch of majors and minors at NYU Abu Dhabi. Tell us everything you studied.
That's the perk of going to a liberal arts university. I majored in social research and public policy with a concentration in political science and legal studies. I was lucky to explore classes in environmental sciences. I took classes in family structure. So honestly, valued that liberal arts education, make sure I explored every area within society.
Wonderful. Also with us here is the second Dutch American on the panel, I being the other one, and that is Willem Kant. Willem.
Thank you, Mariët. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to be speaking on these series and just to be engaging with NYU Abu Dhabi. You know, I always look back with great fondness of my time there, so it's always great to be able to talk about our school and what we're trying to achieve. So anyway, yeah, so my name is Willem James Kant. I'm Dutch American. I'm currently living in Nairobi. I graduated last year, actually. It was class of 2019. So one of the most recent graduates, I think, on our panel today. And I currently work for the International Rescue Committee, which is a large humanitarian organization. And I work for the Somalia Country Program, where I support the grants teams and also support on our peace building and governance programs in Somalia.
Wonderful. And also with us is Marie-Claude Ipko. Marie-Claude.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marie-Claude. Like Metha, we graduated together, so I'm class of 2018 as well. I'm currently in Paris, working with Sciences Po, where I just finished my master's as well. Paris is also the place that I call home. Abu Dhabi is also one of them, but at the moment, Paris. And next year I'll be going to Beijing because I was awarded the Ching scholarship. So I'm just waiting for this, and hopefully it gets better and I get to experience more.
Tell us a little bit more, Marie-Claude, about the Ching scholarship. You know, it's a relatively new one still, and people are less familiar with it, but NYU Abu Dhabi has had amazing success there. Tell us what it's about.
So what drew me to it is that it's very similar to NYU Abu Dhabi. It's about gathering talent and future leaders, people who are interested in the future of the world, globalization, anything you want, and who also have a specific interest in China and Chinese future, Chinese policies, etc., which I do have. And so we all go to Beijing for 1 to 2 years, depending on what you decide to do. Study there with some excellent professors and practitioners as well, learning the culture, the language, and hopefully experiencing a lot of new things in order to become a better leader in the future.
So you don't need to already have Chinese as a language before you go.
Not at all. No, you can. So some of my future colleagues, I guess, do speak Chinese already. Some of them don't at all. Some of them are in the middle. Chinese is mandatory once you go, but they are very good at finding the right level for you. So if you're interested, not speaking Chinese is not an obstacle. So don't be afraid of that.
Congratulations again. It's exciting that you're headed there. And also, someone very familiar with China or already very familiar with China is Corey Meyer. Corey.
Thanks, Mariette, and thanks everyone for being here today. My name's Corey. I'm currently living in New York City, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio in the US. I graduated in 2015, so I was part of the second class at NYU Abu Dhabi. And after graduation, I joined the Schwarzman program for 1 year at Tsinghua University in Beijing. And I've also then graduated from law school here in the US. And I'm working as a lawyer in a big international law firm where I represent companies in complex disputes and also try to maintain as robust or pro bono practice as time allows, where I represent minority, veterans, and incarcerated individuals.
Amazing combination of the global and the local, right? It's the pro bono work is so important. I'm glad you have time for that. Are you with Davis Polk Wardwell? Is that the firm where you are?
Yeah, it's called Davis Polk Wardwell.
Yeah, amazing firm of enormous capacity and international reach. And actually, it's a very funny coincidence, but the very last person who was my executive assistant at the Mellon Foundation, I had hired from Davis Polk, and she was extremely well prepared and extremely globally interested and oriented and so forth. So this is a nice little connection. Okay, we're going to dive right into questions of globalization. Of course, we all know that even before the pandemic, globalization that seemed such a natural good, a good of the internet age, a good of the cheap air travel age. In the 1990s, we all thought it was an amazing thing for the most part. And of course, already in the 2000s, we've seen a lot of pushback against it because of the flows of labor markets and so forth, shifting of opportunities to work in one's home country, maybe to other countries that benefited in some ways, but also led to labor practices people might not like and so forth. You could say that some of globalization has been accountable for growing inequality. That's a hard topic, but it could certainly be argued. And of course, we also know that with all that pushback against globalization, a lot of nativism, nationalism, and other very unpleasant attendant ways of stereotyping people, discriminating against them, keeping them out the door. I'm thinking of Willem's work with IRC. The refugee crisis has only grown perhaps also as a result of certain elements of globalization. It's a hard topic. It's especially challenging for a university like NYU Abu Dhabi, which of course thrives on its internationalism and tries to be a force for using internationalism in a positive way, for thinking about not just globalization as some abstraction, but as getting people together to solve problems across borders, because most of the great problems of our age, including some of the ones I've mentioned, and climate change, don't respect borders to begin with. So it's a challenge for us and therefore important to talk about. So let's just start with, in some very basic way, I'm going to ask each of you to say something about this. Can each of you name one great thing and one really bad thing about globalization? And you can say the same things. If you can just take a little second to think about it, then I'm just going to call on you, just as if it's seminar. Sorry, once a professor, always a professor. Corey, name one great and one bad thing about globalization, please.
Yeah, I think that globalization can be seen sort of on 3 dimensions: the economic dimension, political dimension, and the cultural dimension. And I think easily the greatest achievement so far has been on the cultural dimension. It's this incredible mix of cultures and ideas. And, NYU Abu Dhabi is a big part of this, bringing thought space from Abu Dhabi, and easily those great ideas come there and go to New York. I think that's a wonderful thing, that we're not only spreading knowledge and culture and our values with each other, but we're making cross-border connections that can last a lifetime. I think the bad thing about globalization is I think it's not accessible to a vast majority of the world's population. I think there are people who could never dream of the kind of lives that we've been able to experience moving around. And it's a question of, for us, how do we ensure that those folks value globalization as much as us? I think that's the biggest challenge and problem for globalization.
Very good. Who would like to take another step? Mesa, how about you?
Sure. On Corey's point, I definitely agree on the cultural aspect being the most positive one. But just to be devil's advocate here, I think globalization has also created a homogenized culture, which I guess has its pros, that we all can speak the same language, understand the same-ish jokes, export our media and receive media. Although I do think it's definitely biased, 1. And then 2, I think the homogenization makes or promotes a certain loss of kind of local and appreciation for diversity and contextual knowledge. I'm speaking from the lens of education, where I think a lot of curriculums are leaning towards a certain homogenized global curriculum when it might not be the most relevant one to their context. And we're losing a lot of that contextual learning because we're aiming to have the best PISA scores, which is like an international standard, to achieve and whatnot. But on that, I think positively, the intercultural engagement that globalization has brought together, and specifically technology, I think the platforms that have become accessible to, like Corey said, it's definitely not accessible to everyone. But I think the small group of people it is accessible to, it has had a significant impact on our lives, the way we view the world. We feel like any cause that's happening across the globe is a cause that we care about. Doesn't necessarily have to happen in our backyard for us to care or advocate about it. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
It's a very important tension that you've brought out, and certainly there are threats, we know, to especially so-called minority cultures, right? Or indigenous cultures and so forth, but many cultures that are small and that have a hard time withstanding with language and music and so forth, dominant paradigms. That's a very good point. Marie-Claude, what do you think?
For me, I would say that the best part of it, and I think kind of building on what both Corey and Mesa said, is the ability to meet people, whether through travel, through shows, through culture, meet people, learn other culture, learn other people, get out of our comfort zone has become increasingly easy, I find. So I think that's definitely the biggest thing for me. But in terms of the worst aspect of it, I would say how, strangely, how polarized it's made the world, because I believe that it's made the other very much visible to us, but also very much simplified. So we're able to build, I guess, to build ourselves in contradiction to people we've never met, to cultures we've never experienced, to languages we've never even heard, maybe through a show or through a song, and decide that those people are not like us and it's somehow good or bad. And I think that has become increasingly true. And to speak to my context right now in France, the social situation I feel is getting worse, especially with certain minorities. And you would think that living in the same countries and ascribing to the same kind of values, Republican values, it would be easier to go beyond and see beyond those differences or try to learn from the others. And I think in the few years, especially coming back from NYU Abu Dhabi, I've noticed even more that this is not something we do anymore. We don't cross those borders, even in the same countries. So yeah, I think that's the worst part, that increased polarizations everywhere. It's hard. Yeah.
We will definitely come back to this topic. I think it is a very important one. Let's hear from Willem, and then we'll draw out some of these comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I think about it, and I think a lot have been mentioned in terms of sort of cultural exchange being really one of the strongest points and exciting things really about globalization. But I think beyond that, also the increased accessibility to knowledge, and sort of the advent of the internet and all the sort of technological developments that we have is also really given a lot of people access to knowledge that was previously not available to them. And I think in terms, when it comes to worse things of globalization, I think a lot of it's been mentioned, of course, polarization, but for me, it's also really rising inequalities, where I think, when we were thinking back of globalization a few decades ago, it was this idea that everyone would benefit. And I think we've seen that a lot of people benefited, but at the same time, the inequalities have also risen. And I think that's definitely one of the worrying things about globalization.
Much of that inequality, of course, plays out in these labor markets, different labor markets, shifting the so-called outsourcing. Well, it is really, outsourcing is one way to kind of the flow of jobs from the United States, other Western countries, to countries that don't have the same resources, countries in the so-called global South and so forth. And I think it's a very difficult problem, because just as Willem has said, that indeed there is a benefit to people having access to knowledge, right, and resources. Not the whole world is digitized. There's an increasing global digital divide as well, but still the way in which cell phone technology has been able to leapfrog some of this, the internet cafes, there is a benefit there. And there are even certain very provocative statements that essentially humanitarian thinkers like Nicholas Kristof from New York Times, who you may know, will make, who says, on the one hand, of course, these sweatshops are horrible. No one would really want to advocate for this. This is not what humanity should wish. But it's better in some countries, there are not enough of them, as opposed to, when you look at what's happening to rural countries, to work of the recycling industry, so to speak, and the dangers that have come with that. So it's a very hard paradox that what has lifted some people out of poverty also looks like inequality at the same time on an individual level. It's very challenging. But let's talk a little bit about technology. Three of you have, I think, mentioned technology in particular. Why do you think, especially maybe Marie-Claude, starting with you, do you think that some of that paradox that you described so well, that on the one hand we see everybody now, sort of, but on the other hand we put them in boxes all the harder, it sometimes seems. Is this technology, or if you actually had a chance to meet people in person and have a coffee, it would be different?
I think if you had the to meet people, it could be different. There are sometimes you just don't agree with, whether in person, on Facebook, on Twitter, doesn't matter. But I do think that not so much technology in my sense, but especially social media in our day and age has become like a very useful one. Even thinking about me, most of my best friends live on like every corner of the world. Connecting with them, sharing with them, all of that goes through social media. So for me, it's invaluable. But then following the US election cycle, for example, or even the kind of discourse that is happening right now in France, because a bit more than a couple terror attacks in the past couple of weeks, the rhetoric that is built around that, and that only goes through social media. A lot of people, when you ask them where their sources are from or what they're talking about, where did you read this? Where are those statistics coming from? They will very confidently say Facebook or Twitter. And when you kind of dig a little bit deeper, oh, but like, where is that source from? Where is that website from? If it's a study, when was it taken? They're like, oh, but it's on Twitter. That many retweet and it had that many like, and that's enough. That's information. And I think that's the issue. And it's probably going to become more prevalent, the whole fake news issue. People think that technology by itself is enough, and I don't think it is. So it's not good or bad. It can become bad when it becomes your source of information, of knowing other people, of learning other cultures, etc. So
Who else would like to come in on this question of what are the potential risks or benefits of technology to a more interconnected world? Anyone else want to comment on this?
Sure, I'd love to comment.
Please.
Just to echo something that Willem said earlier, I think that access to knowledge has definitely been a big benefit of technology and the access it has provided us. My friend was just telling me earlier today about how she found an Italian art historian who has found a Persian script or has had it passed down in their family for so long, and then was able to find it through technology. And so I think these small connections are definitely beneficial, but I do agree with Mary Claude on the fact that it can be biased. And I think this is where we need to spread awareness and maybe also start educating or incorporating it into our education system, which is what are the skills that you need in order to absorb this knowledge with a holistic lens rather than the plain, like, this is the 100% truth, it has 100 retweets, it's fact at this point, you know, someone would have second guessed it, so I don't need to second guess it. So how do we instill those skills and I guess values of trying to find the truth in the information that you're receiving? And especially in an age where you have information being put on the internet literally every millisecond, there's no way we can, you know, try to put, I think this is what's happening in the US right now with Twitter, kind of like, they would put like a, did you read this article before you retweet it? Like they're trying to filter it, but I think it's a responsibility on both, you know, the institution or the corporation or the business that's putting this information out there, but also the individuals that are feeding the platform with this information to be able to have the skills to evaluate it. You know, is this truth? What are the resources that I need to check to make sure that I get the whole picture and not just biased information on based on someone's opinion?
All right, that's a very perceptive comment. There's a huge gap. There are gaps, right? From opinion to information, from information to knowledge, let alone wisdom, which is somewhere over here out there, right? And empathy and so forth. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Willem, would you talk a little bit, since you're working for the IRC, which is such an amazing organization, the International Rescue Committee does more as a private philanthropic and acting foundation, you know, operating foundation, does more than almost any organization I know of in advocacy, but actually delivering goods to people in incredible distress who've been on the run for a long time or are kind of have essentially been living in refugee camps for decades. It's the whole range they take care of. How do you use technology in your work, and how do you see IRC do this well?
Yeah, no, and thank you so much, Mariët, also for that. I think when it comes to technology in the IRC, I mean, it's a very integral part actually of a lot of our programming. And I think a lot of you're seeing, and this is in the humanitarian development sort of sphere in general, where there is a huge push for kind of technological advancements, especially now also given with COVID, because, we also can't do that much, physical service delivery in some cases. And I think specifically in sort of the Somalia context, a lot of our usage is through sort of cash transfers, which then go sort of, this is kind of a direct impact method where we, identify beneficiary populations, people that are really in desperate need of additional income, basically, to either bridge, short-term or sometimes in some cases sort of longer-term kind of needs. And we provide them with sort of digital cash transfers. And I think that's really been one of the key technological developments, especially even in Africa as a broader continent and even beyond, where the rise of sort of digitalization has also resulted in us being able to have more direct service delivery and through sort of kind of these mobile cash transfers. And who could have thought about this, 20 years ago?
That is a positive, to be sure. And of course, education. We know we've got to get it right. That's an important thing, but it is reaching more people than ever before, which is a good thing.
No, certainly. And just briefly on your point on education, I think also, especially, as you're speaking about refugee camps, and I actually believe NYU Abu Dhabi is also involved, or our former president of NYU, John Sexton, in the University of the People, kind of providing sort of access to educational opportunities online, and really promoting that sort of as a tool of accessibility, I think is really one of the exciting things also about sort of technological advancements, for sure.
Thank you for mentioning the University of the People. I also was introduced by John Sexton to its founder, Shai Reshef, who's a remarkable entrepreneur from Israel, who has built this incredible University of the People, which basically provides an undergraduate degree. Initially, they were 2-year degrees and then 4-year degrees, initially only in business and in computer science. And he himself they do it entirely for free. You can pay a small fee for the final exams, but they will waive it if you can't afford it. You can do it with the lowest grade technology imaginable. And some of the greatest minds on earth, including a former dean of NYU, Dalton Conley, former dean of social science, built the institution, created a curriculum. It's delivered entirely by volunteer faculty, people who want to do the kind of pro bono work that Corey is doing, but in this case, in educational service, and thousands of students who would never get a degree otherwise. They wouldn't have access to the idea of higher education even. And that's what he says. Shai says, Mariët, when he was convincing me that I should do something for them when I was at the Mellon Foundation, and we did, to help launch it in Arabic, because it exists in English. So much need in the Arab world, Arab youth, Arab shut-in people who have no access. When he said, Mariët, of course, this is not a great liberal arts education. It's bare bones. But it's better than nothing. Your own kids should not take this degree, he said, but it's really good if you need to get a little lift. So that's one of those really great examples. I'm glad that you mentioned it. And a benefit of globalization, that you can bring this to anywhere where there is a cell tower, basically, or a cable. Let's think a little bit about COVID-19. Several of you referred to it. I want to turn to Corey maybe first, because of course, Corey, having been in China, although not at the time that the virus broke out in Wuhan, but having obviously incredible experience of the country, and then being in New York, essentially the next, after Italy, the next great site of where we began to realize how serious this was. I'm just wondering, I'm going to ask this question more broadly, but it seems that COVID-19 has obviously had an enormous effect on globalization and the processes that animated it. not the internet, thank heavens for the internet, you could say, but certainly air travel, the economy, these integrations of our economies and so forth, look like a vulnerability. What do you think about the long-term outcomes, medium to long-term outcomes of the pandemic on globalization?
Well, I think if we haven't realized it already, I think we're coming to the realization that our global institutions may have failed us by failing to respond to this in a rapid enough manner and call attention to these issues. And we don't know at this point, and I think it will take time to really assess whether it's how we, let's say from the United States, have plugged into those institutions. Were we ignoring warning signs that were out there? Or do those institutions not have the resources and authority they need to take the kind of action that could have prevented or stopped this from spreading around the globe? And I think certainly we can say this disease has spread easier because of globalization and how connected we are. But I don't think that's a reason to say stop globalizing. I think our reaction should be is how do we strengthen our global institutions to prevent this negative effect from happening again in the future.
Metha, you have thought a lot about international relations. What do you think about this question of COVID's impact, medium to longer term? What could come out of this for globalization?
To echo Corey's answer of, strengthening global ties, I want to focus on a positive lens because a lot of us can go on and on about all the negative things that COVID has impacted. But I think it has actually interconnected, at least in the world of education, brought together a lot of possibilities and opportunities for people that previously were not an option. So I was attending conferences that previously I would have needed to fly to Miami to attend and wouldn't have fit my schedule. I was able to bring in teachers and professors to give courses for long-term from international, highly recognized schools and higher education to teach kids in the UAE that would have never heard of these, or been able to access these courses because the professors wouldn't have traveled or left their institution to be a visiting professor in the UAE. And so I think it has honestly highlighted how interconnected we are as a community. I can speak on the case of education, but I'm sure Marie-Claude can talk about other ways of how, it has maybe promoted closed borders and whatnot. But trying to see the glass half full rather than half empty, I think it has definitely highlighted how we can use this opportunity to bring people together and actually shaped it for the long term. Why should our conferences be exclusive? Why should teaching only look at the teachers accessible within the region and not actually, maybe over time? I mean, this contradicts what I was saying earlier about localized education, but like if there are things that are relevant, bringing in experts from other places in certain fields. So I think it has definitely created an opportunity for collaboration.
Yes, I think that's very true. Marie-Claude, obviously hard situation in France right now, I think again. And what would you say about, if you can look past the immediate, there is at some point, you'd have to think we'll have a basket of vaccines, treatments are better than they were, but it's just a bear and we're gonna have to get through it a little bit longer. But do you see both negative and positive? What are some of these globalization outcomes you could project?
I think negatives, like Metha briefly mentioned and Corey mentioned as well, this urge to close borders and kind of close in on ourselves. I think that's the immediate reaction because as the narrative was construed, it came from outside. And if those people weren't allowed in, et cetera, we would be all fine and COVID would never exist. But I think beyond that, especially looking at France, I think it's, first of all, in terms of, like Corey said, our institutions, nationally at least, have failed us in quite a few, I think, quite a few areas, but I think people are now in a wave right now and we're in lockdown again. I think people are waking up to the fact that what we're being told is not good anymore, and we're not going to stand for it anymore. And this is a democracy, this is a republic, we have the power. So I think a lot of people who maybe before were very comfortable are waking up to their political power and the power they could have in activism in their own specific fields. I have friends who were quite literally thrust into the crisis because they're medical students and they were doing they were interns before the crisis, and they've been and they were tests on people and like helping in the ICUs, etc. And they realized that the current model of our hospitals in France is not working. Our current social security provides a lot, but we need more. And I think one big thing I've realized, because I was in London for the first half of COVID and then I moved back to Paris, is that people are realizing that a lot of things we were told, oh, we can't do it because the money's not there, we can. Because COVID first phase, a whole lot of money appeared apparently, so we have the money. And we need to be able to organize and decide where we want to put this money, what is important for us as a society. And I think this is so it depends on how globally and locally we're going to harness it. But I think that people waking up is definitely a good side, not a good side, but in term will be a positive of the crisis. So
I want to underscore your point about resources. You know, when you're my age, you've seen a lot of political systems. I have lived in quite a few countries. I've followed budgetary processes of the public purse. And it's almost extraordinary how people say, well, no, that can't possibly happen. These are choices. They're political choices because the global financial system can organize itself to support certain things and not others. And the same is true for internal economies. And for example, I would quite like to see our international financial institutions step up harder to support debt relief for countries that are really struggling with COVID-19. So your point is absolutely right. Never take that answer as just like there's no money, because magically it actually can appear. It isn't without boundaries, of course, but I think it's a really fine point. Willem, what is your thinking? But I want to ask you actually a very specific question, given how well familiar you are with countries in Africa. People marvel quite a bit that, and you can think about that marveling, whether that's appropriate marveling or not, but they marvel quite a bit that on the continent, COVID-19 has not hacked into communities quite as horribly as elsewhere. I try to use my words very carefully here. Do you have a view of why that might be, or what you're hearing about, a thought that you think is credible about an explanation for that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's an interesting question. I think from us, and I've actually sort of lived through the pandemic so far in Nairobi. I actually haven't left since August. So I've been in Kenya pretty much throughout, and I'll be here for the foreseeable future. It's a question that we all do wonder sometimes. I think there's several elements to it. I think the first part is, especially at the beginning of the pandemic crisis, there was a huge oversaturation of negative media coverage about a lot of African countries, sort of predicting a doomsday scenario of what would happen on the continent, as it sort of would fit this kind of linear path that, for example, some European countries and North America has faced. And I think that was one part which really kind of set the stage, as if there was sort of this expectation that things would blow up here, which in reality now all of a sudden everyone's asking, well, it's really not that bad. Now, that is one part of the answer. I think another part of the answer is, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of stringent measures that were taken, and some of those also throughout the continent have also, created a lot of backlash and a lot of issues also in terms of human rights and in terms of ways in which countries sort of overstepped kind of their securitization policies in terms of containing the pandemic. So that's definitely was one of the challenges also, and it continues really to be an issue. But I think, when it comes to kind of the health explanation for why, COVID isn't, seen as sort of widespread here. I mean, some of it has to do with a lack of testing. Sometimes we just don't know the numbers. Are the numbers accurate? Where is all the testing coming from? That's one part. And I think another part is that, there is, sort of especially kind of an understanding that there has to be some kind of engagement with sort of COVID prevention rules. And I think, specifically in Nairobi, while there's definitely many opportunities that things could have been better, in the beginning, people were wearing masks as you sort of enter shops and your temperature's being taken. And there tended to be kind of more of an acceptance of, okay, this could be quite a severe issue. And so let's sort of treat it as such. Of course, with mixing responses. But I think that's kind of my take on it, especially in sort of East Africa and in Kenya and more sort of broadly the continent. But I'm hopeful that in the next few years, we'll also get more kind of health-related explanations from the epidemiologists who are also studying kind of the different responses that we've seen in the world.
I saw Marie-Claude sort of nodding and listening intently. Did you want to comment on this?
I mean, I have no expertise on this, but my father lives in Ivory Coast, and I have a few from NYUAD and beyond who are also living on the continent right now. And I talked to one of them last week, and I was telling, she was watching the news. So she was watching what was happening in France and our second lockdown. And she told me, oh, right, my mom was watching the news and she said, oh, right, COVID is still a thing, which kind of struck me. Because I know it's still a thing even on the continent, but the way it was handled and the way people are reacting to it and the measures that were taken and will be taken makes it a very different experience depending on where you are in the world. So
yeah, it is shifting and localized. I want to say one thing. Metha, you give such a beautiful answer about education and the benefits of actually kind of rethinking how you can do education well online. This is one of the great challenges for universities, including our own. Our teachers are doing pretty well. And I'd like to think that even if, of course, we want to be back in this beautiful library behind me and on campus, and that's what we love, and that has to keep happening. We can't just connect as human beings only online. Nonetheless, to our earlier topic about bringing good things to the world through technology, we now have a lot of expertise. If we can even bring a little bit of that quality to many more people through the online channels who may never set foot on our campus, I think that that's actually a beautiful idea that could come out of this, even for a place as relatively small as NYU Abu Dhabi. I did want to say, Metha, and to all of you who are not here, this country is doing an incredible job managing this pandemic. Of course, we too have seen, somewhat growing numbers of cases recently, but healthcare has been incredible. Supply lines of food and medicine have been very cared for. The country has extended, as always, the hand across borders to help other countries, including Iran, including places in Syria, places that are not necessarily politically aligned with this country, to put it mildly. And yet for the public health, for the solidarity that we need in dealing with this pandemic, you all have said these international institutions have sort of either failed us or they haven't been supported properly. There's usually a little bit of a both and there. This country really is doing very well, and we feel quite well supported and secure here. The testing from day one has been incredible. And so leadership matters. And I wanted to ask you all about leadership now. If you were the leader of your home country, you can pick any one of your home countries because I know you have most of you have more than one. If you were the leader of your home country, what is the first challenge that you would address to support better international solidarity and connection? What would you do? Who wants to start? Corey, we haven't heard from you in a little while.
Well, I think when I first hear this question, my my mind goes to climate change, because I think long after the COVID pandemic is over, we're still going to have to deal with what is even a tougher, knottier challenge in climate change. And I think a lot of people, myself included in the US, were very sad to hear that the US withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords. So I think it's very important that the US rejoin those as soon as possible, not only for the climate benefits, but I think it's an important signal to the world that the US is willing to make a commitment to other countries, and that the US is willing to sacrifice something for the betterment of everyone. And it seems like the real challenge to the Paris Climate Accords is the sense that the US is giving up something that someone else is not giving up. But even if that's true, which I think it is very debatable, the sense is the US has gained a lot from globalization, and the price of better environmental regulations is not too big and nowhere near as large as the benefits that the US has gotten from the world through globalization.
Corey, I sort of have a growing feeling that your wish may be granted before too long.
Yes, I think so.
That's certainly looking pretty positive. Metha, what would you do? You are, of course, in your own country here, and the leadership of this country are very good listeners, I think. So what do you think is most important to do to help connect the world better and show its solidarity, its human connection?
I honestly found it hard to answer this question for two reasons. The first one is, I think it's really difficult to put pressure on a specific country to lead global interconnectedness and globalization, because I feel like that inherently imposes a certain hierarchy of like, oh, we do this so well, so you should do the same. And then the second reason is, I think there's a lot that's actually being done in the UAE that tackles, how to celebrate diversity. So in the Year of Tolerance, what I really enjoyed is the definition of tolerance was not just coexistence. We don't want people to coexist. We want people to engage with one another. We want people to learn from one another. We want to promote intercultural engagement. And I think that is symbolized through the new project where they plan to build a mosque, a synagogue, and a church being built next to each other. And I think for me, the experience at NYU Abu Dhabi, even at a very small scale, was a big, game changer in terms of globalization. I think we got to experiment with it within our little bubble, the pros, the cons, the difficulties of trying to find who you are, what your national identity even means, questioning that within such a diverse community. And I think the best outcome that I've had outside or from my experience at NYU Abu Dhabi, and specifically experimenting with that, is it shouldn't matter your nationality. What matters is that we're all humans and we care for each other because we're humans, rather than, because of who our nationality or what our passport says.
A humble stance is probably a good step, and leadership doesn't have to be bossy. Arlie Petters beautifully spoke, the new provost, who I hope you'll get to meet before long, spoke beautifully about what it means to be a servant leader. And I think I see a lot of that in this country, actually. It's very interesting. Marie-Claude, what would you do? And for which country? In which country? In which country? You do it for the world, that's the point, but in which country would you do it?
I'm thinking, looking at kind of both countries at the moment. France is the most pressing matter, really. And I mean, like Metha, hard to answer the question, but I think as a model for the future, like seeing that globalization is not going to go away. it's going to get deeper and deeper, and we need to figure out how to make it more sustainable, better, etc. Fit our future goals better than the goals of 1945. So I would say it starts in your own backyard before trying or having the pretension to go and, France has a sit at the Security Council before and trying to change things there. Look in your own backyard and do what needs to be done. I think even looking at the example of the UAE, France publicly, I would say, try to reivindicate that integration and cohesion, and we're all one under the same values, regardless of ethnicity, religion, etc. And that's not true anymore. So I think what I would do is work on that social cohesion, try and find, or maybe redefine what it means to be French. And I think once as a community, as a country, we figure that out again for ourselves, where we are now with the challenges that we're going to face in the future, I think we can better help ourselves and everyone else. So, yeah.
I think you're saying something very important about belonging. It isn't a bad thing to like your country and to be proud of it. But as you say, it's not one thing being France, but how do you come together and work for social cohesion across lines of difference that have become more visible and have become bigger because of globalization? It's a very interesting perspective. Willem, what would you do? What would you do in the Netherlands? I'm just really curious.
Yeah, I think one of the places I would start is sort of reframing the discourse around multilateralism and international cooperation with more of a domestic well-being aspect to it. And I mean, I think we've, and this is something that Maria also sort of briefly touched upon, is this idea of the nation state and nation building is still very fundamental to the identities of the world and the way in which we've structured our international cooperation system. And peace and security is all a lot of times about the nation state. And I think that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I think one of the things that we could look at is saying, okay, there is a security element and a vulnerability, because as one nation alone, you're never strong enough to solve the world's problems. And I think if you can make and rephrase the argument where it's more of a kind of, in some ways, a nationalist argument for kind of increased security because of the vulnerability, that will actually resonate, I think, more with populations, because it's true. I think it's easy for a lot of people, and sometimes myself included, as sort of kind of a global elite, as we like to call it, well-traveled, well-educated, sort of has this global experiences that's very much limited to a certain small percentage of a population. It's okay, how can you actually transfer those experiences also on a sort of nationalist kind of thinking and make people understand that it is in your national interest to have global cooperation. And that's really where I would try to start.
Reframe it. The Netherlands has a good history of it, having come out of a very difficult and very imperial colonial history. It has kind of been able to convert some of that. So there's hope. Yeah, I see tremendous hope in all of you. I want to say that I see tremendous hope in all of you. Each of you happily is engaged in purposeful work today and have plans that make you look ahead, and that you will move further, pandemic or no pandemic. It's been such a great conversation, but I want to ask you one more question, knowing how difficult this moment is for students around the world, even though I'm happy that most of them, certainly at NYUAD, are continuing to study and haven't put their lives on hold. It seems very important to keep doing that. If each of you could say one thing to your successors at NYUAD today, our current students, what would it be? I'm going to start with Metha.
I think one of the biggest perks of NYU Abu Dhabi is the community that you're in. And I just want to remind all the students that just because you're not on campus, I don't think that community has gone anywhere. Alumni, current students, future applicants, they're they're all still your community and family. And I can attest to that in my experience in the UK. I got to meet a lot of NYU Abu Dhabi alumni that we weren't necessarily best friends on campus, but NYU Abu Dhabi brought us together, and our shared experience there just bonded us in a way that I don't think anyone else understands. So yeah, reach out to your community, find comfort in the community that surrounds you, not just comfort, but even motivation to continue fighting the day-to-day challenges of online education and everything that's happening in the world.
Wonderful comment. The community is strong. The state of our community stays strong even as we all deal with these issues. Marie-Claude, what would you say?
I mean, like Meta said, reach out. Whatever it is that you need, someone to talk to, a shoulder to cry on, anything, reach out to your friends, colleagues, professors, alumni. We're all here. We're a big family. That's wonderful. So make use of that. And I think what got me through this pandemic and figuring out my next steps in general, two things. First of all, the worst they can say is no. Don't put limits on yourself on anything. A no is a no. That's fine. You learn from it, you grow, you move on. But, putting boundaries on what you can do, what you can aspire to, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, what you want to change, you're the only one that's going to lose at that. So the worst thing they can say is no. And the other thing is life goes on, literally. The pandemic right now, it seems like the end of the world for a lot of us, me included, but vaccine is maybe almost there in some countries. So it's going to pass. And we're all going to hopefully grow bigger and better as a community, NYUAD, global society, etc. So yeah, just keep that in mind. It's all gonna pass. So stay strong.
It will pass. That longer duration is very important to think about. And the world has come through somewhat similar things and even worse things. I think it's important to remember. Let's see, Corey, over to you.
Yeah, at risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to also emphasize community and reaching out. I think one of the beautiful things that's come from the pandemic, especially among the alumni community, is how easy it has been to just pick up the phone and call someone who maybe I've fallen out of touch over the past couple of years or since we've graduated. And invariably they're going to answer and they're going to want to talk and catch up. And I think that's been great, particularly when in New York, everything was closed and I was stuck at my house. It was so good being able to get these social interactions on Skype and Zoom and on the phone with other folks. And I think, maybe you're a student now, you can definitely call folks who've already graduated, reach out on LinkedIn if you're having questions or thoughts about your future. I would say go for it. I think people are way more likely to respond today than at any other time. And so I think take advantage of it.
So everybody, Corey might have been a broken record, but it's a really good record. And it's actually not broken because it's so connected. I really love that comment and that the three of you have already made. It really is so on display. And I've had alums reach out to me and said, how can we help the seniors? That was in the spring, and they helped and they networked with them and so forth. So this is the greatest resource we have is people. And we have to kind of keep and in our own community, that's especially true. Willem, you get to give the last comment, and it can be something else. It's okay if it's something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think the family is this, and when I think back at NYU Abu Dhabi, I mean, that is one of the things that always comes to mind, right? It's that family feeling that we have even after graduation. And the fact that Corey graduated in 2015 and still feels connected to me is so exciting to hear. But I guess beyond that, I would also say, don't lose hope, don't lose perspective, and also just keep going. I think it's difficult sometimes with all of these global changes going on to sort of get swept across, and sort of in all of it, and sort of your own thinking and your own sort of persona, and it becomes kind of difficult to cope with it. And I think taking it small, taking it step by step is something that's really helped me, is sort of just keeping that perspective on what is your position in all of these global events. How much can you impact those events? how much can we impact our own daily decisions, and what is sort of that in-between line, and how does that link to your sort of future aspirations? And so for me, it's really just about take it slow and take it step by step.
Step by step. I want to thank all four of you, Mesa, Corey, Marie-Claude, and Willem. You are shining examples of hope to me and of energy and thoughtfulness. You really made me learn a lot. Your perspective is razor sharp and empathetic at the same time. Very important. You're just shining examples of the best of NYU Abu Dhabi. Thank you so much. And everyone who tuned in and everyone who is watching the video later, thank you for being with us. And please stay tuned for the next of our conversations with global leaders. Good night, good morning, good afternoon. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.